Hi, this is Dr. Bird. I tried to go live today and had some technical difficulties. So we're trying again. And I love that some folks showed up on a Saturday afternoon to track with me. And and so here we're take two. And sorry for the, yeah, I'm learning. I'm learning as we go. Okay. Figuring it out. So today I want to read Genesis 3. And there's a lot going on in this chapter of Genesis. Yeah, let's see what's going on here. Camera. That is not the one I want. That's the one I want. That's much better. Okay. No, maybe it's not. Anyway, so there's a lot going on in Genesis 3. So what I want to do is ask you to think about anything that you think about Genesis 3. I would like you to just collect it and set it aside. And what I'd like you to do is think about if it makes a difference. I'm going to read through this chapter pretty just normally, going to read through it. And I'm not going to use the married language. I'm not going to use the married labels that every single English translation uses. Okay. I'm actually going to read what the Hebrew says, which is man and woman. There is no noun for husband or wife. So I'm just going to talk about man and woman. And I'd like you to think about whether or not it matters to you. Does that make a difference to you that these two humans, the first two humans that are being talked about in Genesis 3, are not married? They are just a man and a woman. So the numerous ways that people are taught to think about these two people as married is part of what I'm trying to highlight here. And I actually am going to be sharing some tables that will show you a little bit more, kind of give you some examples of passages that say man and woman versus man and wife or husband and wife. Also, the verb came up yesterday. The verb to take is what's usually in the Hebrew, and we consistently see that translated as to marry instead of just a man takes a woman. We see a man marrying or that kind of thing. So I also have some tables or some tables I can share with you all to help you see what I'm talking about there. There are times when to take is translated as to take in the English. Things like when God tells Abraham to take his son, his only son, even though he has two sons, his only son, Isaac, whom he loves, and go slaughter him on the mountaintop, right? That's to take. But it's also, when it's talking about a man taking a woman, translated as to marry. Okay. So that's what I want to highlight here. So I'm going to read through Genesis 3 and focus on just that element. Does it change anything for you when you hear this without the marital labels? Okay. Genesis 3. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, Did God say, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden. Nor shall you touch it, or you shall die. It's not really what was said. That's a thing to think about. But anyway, but the serpent said to the woman, you will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her man who was with her, and he ate. Not her husband, her man. Okay. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. I don't know if you've ever tried to sew leaves together or not. That's okay. They clearly needed someone to help them on that. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. And the man and his woman hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Not the man and his wife, but the man and his woman hid themselves. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, where are you? The man said, I heard the sound of you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked. So I hid myself. God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." And the Lord said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent tricked me, and I ate." And the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire shall be for your man, and he shall rule over you." And to the man he said, "Because you've listened to the voice of your woman, and have eaten of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return." The man named his woman Eve, not his wife, his woman, because she was the mother of all living. And the Lord God made garments of skins for the man and for his woman, and clothed them, not the man and his wife, but the man and his woman. Then the Lord God said, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." Therefore, the Lord God sent them forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which the human was taken. God drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. That last part isn't super essential, but I included it because of the reference to the woman versus wife. So there are only 3 or 4 times in this chapter where the translation committees have told us or have directed us to think about these first 2 humans as married. But it's worth your consideration because we start out thinking about and talking about Adam and Eve as married. We talk about God telling humans to be married and to be procreative and to not have sex before marriage, all from these first 3 chapters of Genesis. Not any of those 3 things are upheld, actually, in the Hebrew, in the telling of the story. The telling of the story tells us they're trying to talk about something else. They didn't yet talk about marriage or think about marriage in the way that we do today. So they weren't using the same kinds of language. They didn't have the same kind of a need for labels the way we do, in part out of respect, because women were property. Back then, we could discuss to what extent women are still being treated in that kind of a way. But regardless, Genesis 3, all kinds of things going on in this. By the way, I will say that there are other issues in this chapter that I've addressed, especially the issue of original sin, whether or not that's actually being discussed in this chapter. The last 2 videos in my Does the Bible Tell You So series are actually addressing that, both in terms of the language and the concepts of original sin. Where did that come from, biblically speaking? And then looking at Genesis 2 and 3, specifically through this lens. I do that in those 2 videos. This series is about passages that talk about sex, marriage, and physical abuse related to intimate body parts. What is Genesis 3 saying about marriage? Nothing. Not a single thing. Does it have 2 people talked about who consider themselves partners to each other? Yeah, that's my man, that's my woman, right? That language is being used. And we do have this thing. I'm going to pass by what's being said to the serpent or the snake. It is of interest to me, but it's not for this particular topic. To the woman, God said, "I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desires shall be for your man, and he shall rule over you. Obviously, this particular collection of lines has caused a lot of problems for women over the years because people take it very seriously. And they take it seriously in a way that it perhaps wasn't intended to be taken. There is an article out by Corley and Peterson. They are a couple, but they both happen to be scholars, so in their own right, and they collaborated on this particular article. But they're talking about how we should perhaps be thinking about this not through the physical pain of childbirth, which was surprising to me, but the longings and the pain, the pangs surrounding the issue of being childless, or the struggle that women have related to childbearing, desiring to bring forth children, and the struggle when they are not able to do so, in particular, given the culture that we're talking about and how important it was for a woman to be able to produce children, specifically male children, for their men. So all kinds of interesting things. If you don't believe me or agree with me or care that this is an alternate way of looking at this, that actually really interestingly does address the language being used here. It also is an important theme that happens to every single female within every single female in the storyline of Genesis. So it's interesting that this is here, right? There's an issue about women struggling. But also the language here is, your desires shall be for your man, and he shall rule over you. This is important language to address briefly. The language there, I've heard many people say this is a way of saying a woman is going to desire the power that men have, or that their husbands have, that the women are going to desire to be leaders. I've heard this kind of language in particular in places that don't think that men and women should be treated as equals in God's eyes, or that think that, leadership positions are gendered, that kind of thing. Whatever you want to believe about leadership positions, the language here isn't about power. It's about sex. It's a physical longing. It's the same kind of longing and desire that is used actually to talk about in Genesis chapter 4, when it talks about sin longs, like this craving or longing that people have in relation to temptation, or inner longings and temptations. So it's not about power. That line isn't, but certainly when we say that he shall rule over you, I'm not at all interested in excusing this and pretending that isn't affirming women being subservient to men, because that's exactly what it's trying to do. The story itself is talking about these, I think it's talking about realities, human realities, that men have been dominating over women for centuries before this story was written. And, back in chapter 2, we had this inkling of the people being partners as equals. And now we have men are going to rule over women, right? Within 2 chapters, we had this shift from equals to hierarchy. It's important. It's in there. And people have clung to the hierarchy and said, this is what God has determined or decided. And so that's how we're going to live, and we're going to affirm that. And it's just part of the problem of sinfulness. Like this is the problem of sinfulness, or whatever consequences of people making their own decisions, is that we're sinful. Everybody's sinful now. And that's passed down through sex, and men rule over women. See Genesis 3:17. So I understand why people read it that way. I understand why people want to apply this to men, husbands and wives, more than just men and women. I understand all of that. I think it's really helpful if we can take a deep breath and take a step back and look at what these stories were doing in context, for whom were they written, and to kind of hold them a little looser, if you will, with an open hand instead of gripping it, and to be able to say they were wrestling with some things in their culture. And this is what they came up with. I also want to say, simply because I'm here live to do this, I haven't even looked to see if people are talking, because there are some comments. I think you can still, okay. I think you can hear me today. That's great. I do want to comment on what's said here about to the man, because I hear people commenting on this. And so, It is absolutely noteworthy to me that the section that's addressed to the man is longer, but doesn't even say as much, doesn't have as many consequences as what's addressed to the woman. So the woman has these just 3 or 4 lines, but it's jam-packed with consequence, and I would suggest perhaps more intense consequence than what we see in the multiple 10, 12 lines, short poetic lines of content addressed to the man. And it is difficult. I'm not trying to say it's not a struggle, right, to feed ourselves and and the children and the people we're caring for. But that's a little bit different of an issue than this social contract and social construct that says that men get to dominate over women, rule over women. So when you read this, I think it should be read as trying to understand why it's hard to find food, trying to understand why did this develop. We have an inkling of humans being equals, but look what's happening around us. Men are ruling over women. How the hell did that happen, right? But in the end, this isn't about marriage, but the language, the English translator, the translation committee members, I know a handful of them, right, made choices to say she's his wife and he's her husband. It's something to think about. It's going to keep coming up. We could talk about the fact that the man gets to name his woman if you want. We could talk about that, like the power he gets to have over her. I don't want to get into that. I want to focus your attention on what's being said here about marriage, sex, and this other piece. There isn't a whole lot being said about this other piece, fortunately. Nothing really specifically being said about sex, but people think this is, or apply this specifically to marriage. I think they also apply it to men and women in general, to be honest. But it's not talking about marriage, in my opinion. I am looking, and I'm sorry that I'm still figuring all these things out now, and I am just so grateful some of you are here. I'm thrilled. Some people showed up on a Saturday. Thank you. This will I'll smooth some things out. We'll figure this out. Okay. But that's it for today. Tomorrow, we're skipping over to chapter 5. No, we do have something in Genesis 4 to talk about briefly. Yep. Lamech. I'll go look it up in the Hebrew. Lamech and his 2 women. So we have something to talk about from Genesis 4. So tomorrow, Genesis 4. Hope you have a good day.